We understand construction. I think how we can help is identifying that risk up front and enabling the transparency that our tools bring to the table.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always good to have you with us, and we've got a full house today. Martin, how are you, sir?
Yeah, good, thanks. And yourself? Feeling a bit precious today, are we?
Yeah, I am. But you just froze, so I feel better now. Dale, how are you?
He's frozen, so he definitely is.
He's just gone.
Such a diva.
I think you stumped him, Martin, at the feeling a bit precious. He's just like, I'm gonna make as if my internet's frozen.
Yeah.
I tried. I did try.
You back
How
with
are
us,
Dale?
Phil? I'm good, thank you. I'm good. I love the fact that you're here. I love the fact that it rains and your internet goes strange in Melbourne, of all places.
Always.
And I love the fact that you had espresso martinis in the early hours and still made the podcast. So well done. Great effort.
And still drinking coffee, you know. I'm still here. You know, rain, hail, or shine, the podcast will continue. You cannot stop us, Dan Andrews. That's our premiere, just in case you don't know. Let's introduce our guest because we're getting silly. Sarah Crawley, welcome to the podcast. Lovely to have you here. How are you?
I'm living the dream. And not hungover.
I listen. I never said I was hungover. I just said I was precious, and I think Martin took my word. So, I love the fact that the subject matter for this today, we can go into a lot of detail, even if my voice is a little bit deeper. But I think that's going to be useful for the listener. So I think, Sarah, first of all, how did you get into this cold hard mess called projects? And let's go from there.
So I, almost by accident, although a project director did once point out that my dad was a contractor. He's an Islamic architect, actually, but did set up his own contracting business. And my mum's a nurse. So when I ended up in healthcare, like refurbishment and construction, someone was like, have you ever spoken to somebody about that? And I had never thought of it. But yeah, I kind of fell into it almost by accident. So kind of like from uni, kind of went straight into it and just loved it. Like, I think it's just one of the most incredible industries where you get to do something tangible. It's not just like how many emails you send or how many PowerPoint slides you've like outputted. And you just meet so many interesting people and can work on such varied projects. I also really liked the combative kind of like mentality. I think it's like in around like people kind of say a lot more around what they mean. So I enjoyed that as well in the sense of like, and then you could still like have it out and then go for a drink in the evening and like, you know, get on with it. And then the next day, everything's kind of honky dory. But yeah, I just really loved kind of construction and healthcare is just kind of where I fell into. And I enjoyed it because it felt like, maybe sounds kind of, I don't know, maybe a bit sad, but I felt like I was doing something meaningful. So when you're in, you know, refurbing intensive care wards and, you know, looking at kind of installing new MRI scanners, you know, it feels like it really matters.
Yeah, brilliant. And so I guess leading on question is how what kind of roles have you taken on in the project space, and which one's the most fulfilling? Before I get into the curvy questions.
I can tell you what the like least fulfilling one is. We can start there and work back, maybe. And that would be like contract administrator on an NEC project is just not fun. Like you're just a glorified post box. Like no one tells you that. Everyone's like, oh, you're NEC certified. Oh, happy days. It's going to be great. And you're just there and you're just like, just a ticketing system post box. I did not enjoy it.
EWNs all day, right? Just boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, here's another CE. Like we can do this early warning, and it's like, you know, it's just like such a game and an art, and it's like, you know, I love the NEC form of contract, and you know, it's fair, it's, you know, cooperative, and all these things, and then it's like all these ZZ clauses inserted at the end of it sometimes, and you're like, oh, it's just undone all this, you know, deep intention. But I definitely didn't enjoy being a contract administrator purely because it just took me away from what I enjoy doing, which is delivery. And it felt like I just became like an administrator, and I didn't get into the industry to do it. And also anybody who has ever worked with me and any of my line managers, particularly the ones at Mace, will tell you I am shit at admin. So I wouldn't say it was like an innate skill, and it just stressed me out. I just didn't really particularly enjoy it. And my favorite role, I really enjoy being like a PM, like, and particularly being like on site, contractor side, like working with your team, with your supply chain. I've always generally had good relationships with my QS and always been like, they're like your right arm. I've just worked for some amazing people, and I just love project management. I think it's so varied. And you get to do kind of a bit of everything. Some people don't like it because they say like, oh, you're a GP, you're not like a specialist. But actually, there's a skill in being a GP.
Yeah, I'm delayed not because I'm blown away, but because my internet is a little bit lagged, Sarah. So if you thought I was pausing for effect, I wasn't. But it sounds like we love project management on this podcast. And the reason we're laughing is because deep down inside, there's something around working with people, and that's what project management's all about. And I think people who love it tend to love people. Would that be a correct assertion?
Well, sometimes other people are hell, let's be honest. And there's definitely times where it's like, ugh, here we go again. But overall, like, it just comes down to good communication. And I think the relationships when you're on site and you're in the muck and bullets of it, you form, I think, a different sort of bond with people than you do perhaps in other industries and in other places. And I think, that connection and those relationships tend to really last when you've really gone through it all.
Mm. Yeah, there's something to be said about pressure forming friendships, right? Under the forge of like a common enemy sometimes. Maybe it's NEC, maybe it's the client, maybe it's the contractor, maybe it's John, because he's a dick. But we all seem to band together when there's, I would call it heroic efforts required. And I think a lot of times, and this is why I have problems with like a lot of the statistics that come with projects and the success of projects, because a lot of people say, we have a lot of like academics out there, Sarah. I don't know if you're an academic, but a lot of academics will say that the reason projects fail are because of X, Y, and Z, and they're very like tangible things. But they don't measure what actually gets projects across the line. And a lot of the time, it's the collective will of a few PMs and engineers and architects and data engineers and contract administrators pulling long hours and getting into the trenches, as we say. And that tends what gets projects across the line. Is that your experience as well? I cut out there, didn't I?
Yeah.
Just in the middle of like this excellent, rhetorical questionnaire that I had prepared for you, Sarah. The internet dropped out. At least I wasn't lying.
I love it. I love. Yeah, exactly. Now we'll go raw. We'll go raw, unedited. But if we just pick up while Val's reconnecting there, I think it's fascinating because we have this innate ability to, on projects, to, I guess, look at things through different lenses, and it's those collective lenses, as you say, that really makes a project tick. And it's so fascinating hearing your story there as well, Sarah, of your favorite and your least favorite, because we'll have people come on here as well and go, actually, you know what, I love contracts, I love trawling through them. We had Brendan Robinson a few episodes ago, and he loves contractual law, and he could literally sit for weeks and weeks on end trawling through every single detail, and he'll know that contract back to front, every single word, which page everything is on, and loves it, absolutely loves it. And then you get someone like yourself going, yeah, not so sure about those Z clauses. So it's fantastic. It's fantastic. But if we, I guess, fast forward a little bit to present day, you now find yourself, I guess, in the tech space, right? And I guess we've landed on a topic for this episode on barriers to adoption of technology in construction. And you must have seen quite a bit of barriers, quite a number of excuses of why it shouldn't be and wouldn't be done. If we break that down, first of all, what does technology mean today in the construction space?
I think there's like what you can read about in the consultancy papers and kind of like what McKinsey kind of report, and there's all this exciting new technology. On my like lived experience of it, and then like even experience like being on the tech side of it now, is that ultimately I would still argue that the dominant forces are Microsoft Excel, WhatsApp, maybe some emails, and largely still paper. Like they're still kind of the norm. So I think there's, but that sounds like negative. Within that, there is huge opportunity. And I think like the legacy systems that are there, they're still, they're the dominant suppliers, but there's huge opportunity kind of in the market. And I do think like it is changing, like times are changing. And I think as, people are kind of waking up to change, we all have amazing apps now on our phone. And I think we're putting up less with having crap tech at work. And, when you're on site and having these behemoth ERP systems pushed down on you, it's like, well, they just don't get used and they don't work because they don't kind of reflect. So does that kind of slightly answer your question, Dale?
Yeah, it does. And it paints a good picture of what you're seeing in terms of, what's the current norm, as you say, when it comes to technology. And I guess some of the challenges and the ones you particularly mentioned there are all around communications, right? There's other parts, I guess, of technology that relate more to information, data, decision-making. But I think the ones that you refer to there are particularly communication. And I think I agree with you, because regardless of the information we have, if we don't have the ability to communicate it quickly and fast and have that line of sight and being able to make the decision on the latest information, then we've failed already. Because if the communication is slow, regardless of how good or how correct and genuine, transparent your data is, if you're making decisions and it's only getting communicated, a week or 4 weeks down the line because of it has to go through reams of different people in the organization to get on some slide that eventually the decision maker sees. It takes you 4 weeks to get it on that slide pack, and then 4 weeks later you review it, so you're 8 weeks behind already. It makes sense that communication is actually the key piece to focus on. We talk about communication skills all the time as people, right? Talking to each other, verbal, non-verbal communication. But when it comes to technology, it's like, how do you bring all of those things to life? And the last podcast we had human-centric, data-driven project delivery, and I think this is actually adding to it as well. This is a point of how we can actually using technology, bring communication to the fore and speeding it up. So is it fair in me saying that that's sort of where you're focusing, is the communication piece?
Yeah, so it's 100%. Like, I think that's where like kind of the magic is. And I think whilst there is a lot of exciting new technology coming into the market that talks about predictive analytics or kind of AI, like, in one of my last projects, I was like, I didn't need AI to tell me if the wall was in the wrong place. I could read a 2D taught how to read a 2D drawing. And then like, even when I remember like where on one project, the medical gas hoses were just in total disrepair. That's not my background. I didn't know what I was looking at. I'd never seen them before when you first see these things. But there's a specialist subcontractor that does that day in, day out, who've been doing it for 25 years. Sean was like, Sarah, these are, these need to be promptly replaced, and a compensation event needs to be raised to the client ASAP. Like, I didn't need anything kind of it. But what was so difficult was just being able to capture like Sean's knowledge and then pass that and like pay it forward. And because we move around so much in construction, like it's so rare. Like if you think about the different subcontractors that all kind of come on board, they all move along, come in at different times, and they go away with that kind of information. And even then within project management, often it's still rare that the PM that starts finishes. So we move around, and it's like you lose that like thread of like, well, and often there's a really good reason around why they didn't touch the air handling unit, but you just don't know. And then it takes ages to try and find that, absent, incomplete, incorrect, or outdated information. So I think that's where I'm really interested in. It's like the human-centric bit that you mentioned is like, we're really after that. Like, how do you capture Joe Bloggs' knowledge on site and then link it back to kind of the other kind of systems, so you can really build a picture around, well, what is the story of this project? And like, I think you see all these different systems around that, like, talk about assets or talk about program, talk about risk. But when you're on site and you're delivering, these things don't live in isolation of each other. Yet we all have to do all this double data entry. And it's like, you know, I was just really interested when I was at Mace, and my last project was a shit show, and I can say that, it was just so chaotic. And I was like, there's a better way of doing this.
Yeah.
And I was just like, we just need to like sort out the communication narrative to be like, why did we not touch AHU 8? So when it came to commissioning and we had a massive falling out, it would just be, we would have had all of that story kind of prepped. And that's like one example, but that's what I'm interested in, and getting all these different stakeholders to communicate with each other, and they get their own copy of the information. And then if you want to link it, you can. And this is where I'm so passionate then about coming into it around, like, data should be interoperable. It should be able to move between different systems. Like, you don't need to build like a behemoth new system. You just need to like play well with others.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And if we move into the barriers bit of the tech, I think that's part of the problem, is we make it so complicated that it is difficult inherently for people to adopt it, because it just automatically goes in that too difficult box, right? And if you make it easy, I mean, you talk about WhatsApp. WhatsApp was really, really easy. Now, who uses the age-old text message, right, anymore? Everyone's on WhatsApp, even though WhatsApp sort of, there was a thing a few years back, wasn't it, where was it during the pandemic, where they went, oh, they're going to share all your information, and then Telegram, and there was another one, and everyone was threatening to go off of WhatsApp, but everyone still uses WhatsApp because it's just easy and everyone's got it. And I feel like, those barriers exist, as you were saying, on technology, because we make it difficult. Now, is there potentially a hidden barrier where people are in their comfort zone? Because one of the things I saw, I think it was a clip from a Stephen Bartlett interview, and he was saying he was chatting to some tech guru, and the speed of change that happens today in a year, in about 30 odd years from now, will probably happen in 10 to 11 days. And so if we're preparing our kids for the future, we've got to prepare them to constantly be comfortable with change. But I feel like there's a lot of us today, particularly in the construction industry or in project delivery, that are in our comfort zones, and we're not used to the rate of change. And so that is a sort of a hidden barrier to adopting new tech as well, because one, it's difficult in the too difficult box, but two, we're actually just not used to it. And so if we're not used to it, we don't adopt technology. Would you agree with that or disagree?
I think I would add to it that I don't think as well we're incentivized to adopt new technologies in construction. Like, remember, like, this is an industry where you want to do everything to mitigate risk. Why would you adopting new technology or new materials or whatever is inherently risky? Like, and so I think there's something around that, and the mindset is like, it's very different. It's just more like, oh, risk, no. So I think there's that. And I also think, if I'm honest, when you're in delivery, you're in that muck and bullets, as I mentioned earlier. To look up and put your head above the parapet, like, it's quite hard to be, I found it really hard to be strategic. And I was just like, when people say it's like, at the end of the month, I was like, buddy, we're trying to make it to the end of the week. Like, I was, my mindset was just like, we just need to get this piece done. Even if someone had landed on my lap being like, we've got this amazing tool that's going to make, save you, like, I don't know, a month of every year of your kind of work and make all my end of month reporting and like suck out all the pain of it. I would have been like, that sounds great. But everything was just right in front of me, and I couldn't see the wood through the trees. And I think, even now when I speak, to people around like who use our technology, or when we're like speaking to new potential clients, like even today, there's an amazing engineer. She's like, we're totally in, but we're moving yard and we're so busy and we don't have time right now. So, can we onboard the site team at the end of, the end of September? And I think that is a real issue in the industry as well. Would be my second point. So like the busyness of people and that, like, you know.
So you bring up a good point though. So whose role is it on projects to be innovative and strategic and hold the mantle of continuous improvement? Is it the PMO's role? Is there another role? Whose role is it to constantly look at innovating during delivery if, you know, as you say, the project manager is so focused on delivery?
It's a good question. I think it depends on what it is that I think it depends on probably what you're trying to pitch in terms of like that benefits, like which stakeholder is going to benefit the most. I think what does irk is like, I don't think at site teams get enough like input into like pushing forward on new tech. I don't think they get consulted enough. I love it when I hear people be like, oh yeah, we're going to go check it with our site teams. I'm like, brilliant, absolutely, you should definitely do that. And they just get ignored. And I see sometimes like people in central office teams push stuff down, and it's like, have you been to site? Like, have you seen the level of like, you know, even if like a PMO gave me like, and it was going to make the client so happy, but it was an extra spreadsheet tab for me to fill in, like, you're increasing my working hours. So I think it depends on what you're pushing, basically, is what I'm saying. Like, if it's finance software, obviously you're going to be pitching it to like the CFOs, QSs, depending on what it is that you're kind of doing. Designs will be maybe more architects. But I think, I'm not really answering your question, but I think to invert it, the most neglected people in the whole thing around pushing new technology is the supply chain and the people on site.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think you have answered it, because like every good project management question is, it depends, right? It does depend. It's contextual. And I think you're right. It's the first bit is actually analyzing, you know, who needs it, who will benefit most from it. Is this a solution looking for a problem? Or is this actually solving a problem that currently exists? I love Eddie Obeng. I always borrow that one from him. But also to bring up another previous guest, Joe Little was talking a lot about, you know, as a project manager, learning what happens at site, learning what those delivering the project go through in order to help make decisions as a PM. And I think you're right. It's getting that feedback loop. And again, it's a self-fulfilling, it's a circle, isn't it? It's chicken and egg. It's like, we need to improve our communication, okay, but give people the opportunity to improve the communication as well. And I think I agree with you when it comes to the opportunities for those actually delivering to have a voice. How do you find when you work with different, I guess, organizations, that those are doing it particularly well at adopting technology? How do they approach it? What is their forum to give? Because we typically work on massive, large projects, right? And it's, as you say, lots in the supply chain, potentially various sites as well. If you're working like on an HS2, for example, how do those that are successful in adopting new tech, what do they do? Do they have special powers?
This is the $1 million question. Any technology like business that solves it, like, feel free to like ring me up, because I have not fully unlocked it yet. So I think if it depends on like where you kind of come in. And I think if you, from us and what we've seen in my lived experience, is if you come in at like a project manager or a project director level, like that kind of element, and then crucially, if they onboard the site team and get their input quickly, the barriers and the friction to adoption just disappear. And in particular, what's been really interesting is, and I never anticipated this, but there's a lot of fear from site teams around them being tracked. And it makes total sense. And because there's a lot of software coming into the market where they are being tracked. And I was thinking, I would never be happy with that on my site. And when I hear people pitching it and be like, oh no, it's really important that we put CCTV over the whole like site, I'm like, do you have that in your office? And they're like, no, I would never accept that. So I'm like, well, why would you have it? Why do you think it's fair to like put it on site? So I think that's one thing. I just like in around like site teams are like, and hang on a minute. So I think there's one around kind of privacy we've definitely seen. Two is like typical of like, well, here's another here's management coming down with another system that's going to make our lives even harder than they already are. I think that can kind of be a prevailing attitude. So I think the best kind of ones that have adopted it have onboarded them early, explained that it's not tracking the benefits to them, and then have quickly showed like, this is how easy it is to use, and this is why it would be beneficial to you. And then ultimately, once they start using it, it can kind of snowball. But, they need to see it. These people are, we're all practical people, they need to see it to kind of believe it. So I think that's really key, and not like, not that just selling like empty platitude of marketing stuff around high level, like, I don't know, virtue signaling stuff that they know is just a load of cod wallop.
But that's the compounded problem.
I love it. I love it.
There's a bit of a compounded problem with the people that make the software and the people that implement the software are not the people that use the software. And that's always been a bit of a disconnect, don't you think?
I could wax lyrical on this, yeah. And I think the people that procure it, don't use it, and it's a massive
100%.
thing. And I think so much could be solved if you like brought them into the process and they had like a fighting say. And I think because in one of the key things that I think construction tech is still struggling to kind of be adopted, and that whilst that like it's on its like trajectory and it's improving, it's still not happening at the rate I think we would all wish it to be happening at. And I think that's also due to death by multiple stakeholder sign off, as well as like, who controls the budget? Is it IT? Is it the project budget? Where's it coming from? And then that causes huge issues. And say like, some site teams where they just don't have that delegated authority, they don't have that purchasing power, so they can't approve it. However, I have seen it where one site manager did adopt some technology and pushed it and got, I remember his commercial director saying at the time, like, if Joe says it's good, I'm sold. I don't need to hear anything more. Like, we're good. We'll adopt it. And I was like, what an incredible, this is a big organization that's got 100 million turnover. I was like, what an incredible organization that they've empowered that site team that much. And the site team, that was a bottom-up approach, not a top-down. But the bottom-up approach, I really want to see this like groundswell work. And I think that's what will truly like unlock a lot of technology. But it's not the norm. Like, they don't have that purchasing power. And then when you hit IT departments, they quite rightly want to make sure like the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and then budgets. But then ultimately, budgets are already tight. Like, margins are low. Who's paying for this? They've got a lowest IT spend than any other industry. Hence why it needs to go on its fintech journey and increase. But it's not there yet.
Yeah, and I see this happening. There's an opportunity, I think, at the start of the project, and Dale and I have talked about this in long form, to do it right, so to speak, get the environment enabled and get people onboarded early. And I find what happens is when you go from bid to mobilization to execution, the first thing that gets shaved, because they realize they can't actually do it for the price they've set when you win the work, let's say, is what are the nice to haves? And software is always on that list, and the associated kind of support structure that goes with it. So any training, any kind of SaaS additionals, any bespoke means. And I saw this great image on the internet. I don't know who built it. It was a great image. It was kind of like all this infrastructure of technology, right, Sarah? And then it was kind of sitting on a fulcrum, and the fulcrum was the little icon of Excel. And it's like, no matter how far we advance ourselves, the weight of the project is literally sitting on Excel, because the back and forth between project interfaces and environments is still the same product from all those decades ago, 30 plus years ago. We're still using the same format, because what ends up happening is we have non-native to non-native talking. And one part of that is the actual market, is the SaaS products that are built didn't play nicely. They're getting better, but they're not quite there. And that's because their IP is what they sell, right? So their product innovation is their baby. That's how they monetize, which is it's a funny thing, actually. And we'll get into that in a sec. But then the second part is, once you've got the tools in place, how do you get them to kind of all work along what you said, the supply chain or the value chain for the project, which isn't vertical, such as like the organizational chart. So we build this beautiful department orientated functional organizational chart. No one delivers a project like that. Or at least I haven't seen one. everyone delivers it from left to right. Yeah, there's a supply chain of work that goes from, and particularly in NECs, I think that's even more apparent. But I've yet to see a product or a technology tool, or at least a neighborhood of tools that enables an end-to-end, which we've heard a lot, right? End-to-end project delivery framework with seamless integration. What's your view on that?
I think the supply chain in order to solve this problem, they have got to be like involved, and tech has got to be made available kind of to them. Like, I think we see a lot of, like, what I find really interesting is people sell software business to business, but that's not how construction works. You know, you can have hundreds of different subcontractors delivering, you know, works on one project. It's not one business at all. And I think until we start, you know, building software that kind of reflects that and allows that, you know, supply chain to communicate with each other easily and get its own copy of the information to avoid any double handling. Yeah, I can't see the situation kind of getting better. And I think, you know, now we're seeing much more kind of a, you know, I still think it's a bit slow, but a groundswell of movement about data being interoperable. But we need to get that right for the majority of the suppliers. Yet we keep most tech is built for the tier ones, which are like what 0.02% of the market in the UK. So, you know, that leaves the remaining 99.8%. And I'm like, we haven't got it right for them. And I think that's one thing around, you can't ignore them. And the second thing is, I just don't think, my hypothesis is that, are the dominant suppliers now going to be the same in the next decade if they don't start adopting data, like open kind of data standards, rather than kind of like locking you in? And I think my guess is that those that allow information to move between different systems, to allow this kind of end-to-end and this linking, will be the market leaders in the future. But if they can't just lock them into the proprietary system, now that's working for them and they're making a lot of good revenue out of that. But I can't see that working in the future, because it just doesn't reflect how construction and the built environment works, let alone then when you go into, you know, FM and handover and, you know, all of that. And, you know, I'm yet to see a digital twin survive contact with a construction project, but that's probably, we're going to digress.
Well, I think what you get is resistance builds up because things are harder than just doing them manually, right? If you have a tool, let's say you've got a hammer, and the hammer's effective, right? Let's say a hammer in a nail is effective. It's not as effective as other tools, but if it's easier and the access is there and you have the skill set, you're going to go to the hammer every time. And then someone says, I've got electronic hammer, and you probably see this invention and it's like, goes automatically. It's completely a waste of time. It probably serves the use case, but it's not effective in terms of implementing into a project at scale. So I think you also get this potential resistance or even idiocracy where they go backwards and they go to dumb tools because the smart tools don't talk to each other.
Yeah, and I mean, you're breaking up a little bit here, but, you know, if we're all honest with each other, you know, as you say, like with the Microsoft Excel, that is the backbone, let's be honest, like that is the market leader. And
sadly,
it does what it does kind of so well, but it's not going to change unless we build it, you know, we build tech that reflects for all of the supply chain to kind of communicate on. And it's you know, it's off the shelf, it's accessible, it's easy to deploy, you know, it avoids excessive customization, and crucially, you don't need ridiculously expensive consultants to implement it for you. But at the moment, the prevailing attitude is, we survived it before, why should we adopt, you know, we survived it before, why should we adopt new tech now? Like, you know, Excel has been our backbone for as long as it has been. We've still delivered, we're still around, we're still, you know, we're still here. What real value add are you actually really going to tangibly give me to my business that Microsoft Excel doesn't already give me?
Yeah, exactly. Now, is Martin still on the line? I'm sure he's got some questions sitting back there.
If I follow on from Dell's as well, how can we get better at learning and sharing data across the sector. You know, in terms of learning, people are more than willing to share their war stories from, you know, their kind of crazy site experiences.
No, he's gone. Well, we carry on without him. Dale, over to you, mate. Any questions?
This is going to be great listening.
I know it's going to be great while listening back to this. Martin, keep going.
Yeah, you know, people enjoy sharing their war stories from project experiences, but there's not much in the way of open source materials like we had for Crossrail Learning Legacy, just to name one. And you touched upon some of those open standards earlier, kind of similar to what's in the fintech market. What kind of standards would you recommend for the sector, and whose responsibility is it to set those standards and create it?
I think, you know, obviously the easiest is top down, and it's government and it's legislated kind of down. And I think they are exploring that. Obviously in February, that's in February this year, they closed off the interoperability kind of review and kind of assessment. And I think it'd be good to kind of see some secondary legislation kind of come out of that to really drive impetus around, to be like, actually, like, you know, this really needs to kind of be resolved within the industry if we're going to move forward and drive real kind of productivity gains at a meaningful kind of level. I think there's that. I think client organizations play a really big part in the sense of they need to recognize that they need multiple stakeholders to input their knowledge. And I think there needs to be a movement in capturing data that really matters, not to keep other people in jobs or it's a tick box exercise. Like, that's something that I think is really kind of important. And then from an open standards, I think needs to be top down driven. And I think the client plays a very important organization. It plays a very significant role in driving change and not capturing information for the sake of capturing information. And like what is really kind of important and kind of crucial. And then I think tech providers and tech solutions need to start playing well with others. So having open APIs where you can move data. I think, you know, there's things like, you know, ACC, like, you know, allowing different solutions to kind of talk to each other or live in kind of an ecosystem together where you know, someone can now I'm echoing. Is that because of Val?
That's because of Val. Keep going.
Okay.
He's going to have to unmute himself when he talks. This is going to be great.
I can't remember my point now, but it was around, like, I can't remember what I was saying. I'm going to be honest.
So
I've
you were talking about
with Val,
tech solutions and working with others.
This edit's going to be amazing.
Kind of go back to the point you made. I don't know if it was a flippant comment, but you said data that matters on site. What in an ideal world, what would be that kind of data?
In the sense of, like, around change is a massive one, right? Like change, and being able to kind of record that would be like an absolute key one for me. I've been here. This is kind of what I've done. I think being flexible, not like the tick box exercise. Like, have you put on your shoes today? I'm being facetious, but like, you know, have you got 2 gloves? Are you wearing glasses? Like, these things that are obviously very important, but you're like, why am I filling this in once a week? Like, it's, you know, and you just tick box and it's like, it goes off into a PDF that maybe goes somewhere on SharePoint and it just dies unless something goes wrong, and then it gets dug out and you can use it for commercial defensibility. But I think, you know, ultimately, I really believe that people on site know what they're there to do. They are smart people. They know kind of what matters. And I really believe, and I think you have a QS talking about this, I don't believe in, like, the dream is like, oh, we all share everything, but that's like a rare where rainbows and unicorns are. It's never going to happen. You need, and you should be controlling, like, who sees what. So certain things that will happen on site and you're like, I don't need the client to see this. Like, it's been within reason, you know, obviously you've got a statutory requirement to report certain things, but there are other things where you're like, the client doesn't need to know this. Like, and I don't, you know, we'll put it up through our, like, approval, like, you know, review process, but I'm not going to make it available to the client. And I think that's something as well that's really key and needs to kind of be adopted, that, like, we all, whilst I'm talking about open data standards, I'm not living in a land or in a belief that it's all like rainbows and unicorns and we all share everything with each other. It's like, no, you do need to control what subcontractor X and subcontractor Y
in that
see,
scenario, is
sure
that more a
that
commercial
they get their own
challenge, or
copy
is
of
it
the information?
something else?
I'm going off on a tangent.
So obviously,
here,
you probably wouldn't want to share pricing information, stuff like that. I get that, but some of the site information, I'm assuming, would be good to share.
I think kind of in pricing. Yeah, and I think in the sense of like what I mean sorry by capturing them, it's like they know what they need to, if something is wrong or someone's not done something, they can take a quick photo video and be like, at Dale, this hasn't been finished, can you flag it with blah blah blah. It doesn't maybe necessarily need to see everyone kind of to see it, and they know like, oh, install works, this was like the pre-setup, this is post-setup, this is kind of the work that I've kind of done. They don't need like a paint by numbers 92-page question to tell them like to make sure that they do their job that they're employed and qualified to do. That's the bit that I mean. And that they kind of, when you're on site, generally you kind of know what you need to be showing. Like, I've been here, this was it when I got here, this is it as I'm leaving it. Is one, I'm being like crude here, but that's like a, they know what to report on, and they kind of know themselves kind of what matters. Like, they're using WhatsApp for that exact same reason. So it's like, how do you just replicate that with it on a permission level? But they do know like again, what they need to escalate and what
where
they don't.
Do you think things like machine learning and AI can really help with this?
Is the key thing for me in this space is, I think if you take a human-centric approach, because I believe in terms of like with ML, if it's shit in, like it's just shit out, right? So if you start capturing their knowledge and you really, like I'm not a like kind of an ML expert, I know, but the capturing all of the site teams and all the different subcontractors and their specialist knowledge, you can create an LLM that way and then use that to train an adaptive learning algorithm. But it's built off of real tangible knowledge, not something where like, sometimes I'm like, a program on some things. Like often these things are like they're a skewed version of the truth, because you're playing a game and you're like, oh, we've put some float here and we're going to put this in here. So it's not like a reflection of the real truth. So sometimes I'm always like, but is it like, is it really that, so I think I really believe in like capturing like, Joe Bloggs' knowledge on site, or Sean's or Emily's, and the works that they're doing, and capturing that. And then what's crucial, I think, is within that is linking it back. So if you want to link it to the P6 program or to Asta, you can, and training something that way, or to assets, to, if you're using Celebri or using MicroStation, whatever it is, but cross-reference it and building up this huge cross-reference library but is built from the people that matter the most and the ones at the coalface doing the bloody work, because we just seem to be ignoring them. And I'm like, that's where the magic is, and no one's tapping into it, and it's driving me nuts, because I'm just like, they're the ones there, they're doing it, they're seeing it, they're living it, they know it better than anybody else, but everyone's ignoring them.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, Sarah, because if you and Marco Fresendo has been on this podcast a few times, he would give you a hug and say, I totally agree with you, because how many schedules are as built? And we're trying to make decisions off of these schedules. And I think we're probably, a lot of tech founders and owners in the construction space will admit, they'll say, it's not going to give you the answer, it's not going to prescribe to you what to do. But I think where we've landed with it, and we had quite a few questions around AI and ML when ChatGPT sort of first broke towards the beginning of the year, and what does it all mean? And I think we're all pretty familiar with it now, and I think we're kind of happy with that. Actually, what it does for us? It just gives us a head start. It's automation. It does things a bit more quicker and gives us a few hints and tips, but it doesn't give us the exact answer. And you still got to go and understand the context around which you're making those decisions. And, how well can machines learn? Well, I think the jury's still out, as I say. I think it takes a whole bunch of, it's the wisdom of crowds, right? Theory. Take a whole bunch of information and give you on aggregate what the best potential answer could be, and then you ask it to regenerate, and it'll give you a different answer or slightly different. And so I think it's the key there, the key advantage is more on how we as humans use the technology rather than purely just copy pasting and going with it and being lazy. So yeah, it's, I think if we oversimplify it and make it too easy as well, that's probably not really a barrier to adoption, but I think that's a failing on us on how we use technology successfully to deliver better outcomes on projects. And it's interesting talking to you because I love the way you think about bringing the human side with technology from the actual site, those delivering, on site, because it's often, I mean, before technology, I can think back, a couple of years back, we said the same thing, like, who's going to site? Who's actually going there? Like in the PMO, in controls, right? Instead of sitting on your computer and looking at Primavera or, cost performance tool or a report, have you been to site? Yeah. Have you actually seen what's going on there? Or is it just a bar that you're looking at, right? And I typically found that those project planners that went to site, those that, the commercial managers, those that typically had office jobs, those that went to site and spoke to the engineers, spoke to those delivering, had a better understanding and better idea of what was going on.
And, it's around ultimately, like, I remember like a planner once ringing me up and I was like, how's it going with the first fix, Sarah? I was like, yeah, it's about 63%. It's like, based on any other evidence, or have you got anything? I was like, no. Like, because you all remember, like, well, it's, when you're in it, you remember what happened. If I say to you, like, what have you done this week? And I say, what did you do last week? And if I said to you, like, oh, what were you doing in the first week of August? Maybe August is a bad month because everyone was on holiday. But like, if I say to you what you did in the first week of June, for instance, you're not gonna, like, I'd be very surprised you're gonna remember. And it's the same thing. And it's like this, and it's like the end of month is like this ring round of like, what happened? And you're scrambling it all to kind of together, and you're in the 20th WhatsApp group putting the photo out to be like, I swear we got a photo of this somewhere, where is it? Digging it out. And yeah, I just think that is absolutely key. And if you need to create tools that reflect how work's delivered, they're mobile first. Oh, here we go again.
I got him. Don't worry, I got him there. Nipped him in the bud.
And, how do you build up like a true picture of what's happening on site and on your project, so you have that kind of greater visibility? And, and PMOs are like, they serve their purpose really well, but how do they access easily that information? And that, is ultimately the dream is that.
Sorry, Sarah, you keep going, or have you lost your train of thought again?
No, I'm just saying around, like, PMOs, like, it's so important that, they're desperate to build up this visibility. And I think there's some, some amazing BI tools and stuff that are coming out. We've jokingly talked a lot about Excel, and that's great, but there are some, other incredible tools kind of coming into the market now that are becoming more accessible, give you that kind of control. And the project managers, I think, are, often taking on, the savvy ones that, that are tech savvy, wanting to kind of connect their own sources and, have a go on Looker or Power BI. But it needs to be connected to site, kind of, create a data pipeline from site that can feed into these different systems, and that can give PMOs, different teams, the visibility that they need, and they can skin it up how they need to then do their reports.
How much does remote working affect what we're talking about these days?
I think it's facilitated adoption in a certain sense, where there's like a greater appetite from like a visibility of kind of what's happening, especially with things like COVID, where you couldn't, it was controlled around who really needed to go to site and who didn't, and around like, well, how do you close that feedback loop? And I think it probably highlighted it. You're saying like, ultimately, sometimes, and there is on certain projects where you're like, I don't believe you that it's done, and you literally need to go down and see it with your own two eyes to be like, okay, it's definitely done. But like, it's like, fool me once, but not fooling me twice, buddy. But I think, with it facilitated adoption in certain regards, in the sense of like that need of visibility of what is happening on site, I think has increased. And I think generally, like, since, you know, whilst people are going back to the office and stuff like that, you know, I still think a lot of central teams and perhaps, like, I don't have experience of this, but like PMOs, like they're still going down there kind of less. So but they still need that input and knowledge from the teams on the ground.
And if they're going down less to site, let's say, are we getting PMOs that are less capable, less experienced of actual delivery? And because let's face it, a lot of the information on many projects, on almost every project, goes to either project control / PMO, whatever you want to call it. And if we're getting people that are working in the project controls or PMO team, they have less and less site experience, and those teams are turning that data into information to make decisions on, and telling the story of what that data actually means, yet they don't understand what's happening on site because they have less and less experience. Does it mean we're making poorer decisions?
Does it mean well, I would argue yes, but then I would argue, why the hell are you employing like people in the PMO that have got no experience? I mean, I was like, I really subscribe to the school of thought where, like, you need to have experience in what it is that you're like reporting on to at least understand it. And I think to not go down there, and I think, I don't know if I'm dodging your question, but I mean, I'd be really surprised if any decent contractor would ever take anybody that would be like, no, I'm not going. I mean, there's a massive call and push to come back to the office anyway. And I think construction is construction. It delivers its work in situ. If people aren't willing to go to site, I mean, for me, I'd be like, here's your P45, like if it was me. And I think, because otherwise, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. But if you don't know what data is coming in from site, I mean, you're not even competent. You shouldn't be even doing your job. That could be catastrophic. I mean, that could go horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah,
that's my opinion.
No, I love that you shared your opinion, because I share your view on the world as well. But you'd be surprised. Anyone with a heartbeat and that's got Primavera on their CV these days seems to be able to get a planning job. Yeah, it's dire sometimes, and then you kind of ask them, well, how do you do this? Open P6 and show us, and you're like, okay, that's a bit of a struggle. I once heard a story. I won't name any names, any organizations or anything, but a person came in for a large organization from a consultancy as a project controls manager, and saw something in Excel and went, is that Primavera P6?
But then it's funny that you mentioned kind of that, like I think like my tech bugbear in the sense of like, you were mentioning earlier around like solutions looking for problems.
Yeah.
And I don't know what your guys' view on this is. My view is like, I see certain people that have no background in the industry, like nothing, not an iota. And they come into it and they're like, this is what's wrong. You need to adopt this tech and it will solve it here. And you don't know what you're talking about. And they're talking to you like you're stupid.
Yeah.
And they know better. And they're like, they've got this solution and it's going to solve all of your problems. And you're like, and it sounds I call it like jazz hands. And I'm like, have you ever been to site or have spoken to anyone that's actually then going to have to implement or like use that? So for me, my thing is around on that is where I'm seeing it come into the tech side of these people, like, and they don't even, I mean, at least that person knew what Microsoft Excel was, or so they had some, but I'm seeing like people that come in cold into the industry. And there's two schools of thought on this. There's one where it's like, no, in order to like drive true change in the industry, you need to come from it. And that's kind of my background. So that's my bias to it, let's be honest. But there is the other side of the coin. It's like, well, no, you can come into the industry knowing nothing about it, and you have a greater awareness of what can actually you have a more strategic overview around how you can really drive that change. And I don't know the answer. We've not seen enough kind of unicorns in the space and winners yet to kind of make a judgment call on that. But I do find it interesting / very, very, it really puts my back up when I see them come in and they sell like some absolute shit. And I'm like, and then and then that person, it will go to the P6 person that's not a P6 person because they've never seen it and it's Excel. And they'll be like, this is amazing, we're going to buy it now. And you're like, and then, X software gets left on the shelf, even though it would deliver real value for the business and drive kind of that real kind of change and meaningful impact.
Yeah. And the thing is, I actually think you hit the nail on the head. And for me, it's the difference between but and. So here's the school of thought of you have to have the experience to know what to do. And here's the school of thought going, actually, if you don't have the old bad habits, then you can actually apply good, clear thinking. But actually, what if you did both? And going, actually, here's what we used to do. How can we build on top with this thinking? So it's not replacing one, but it's going, and have we thought of this? And I think you're right, because of the industry we're in, and there's this, it's combative and it's robust. There's always a fight to be picked. I don't know why in our industry. And you're like, stop fighting. Like, just be open-minded, grow in a considered way. But it's always this versus that, agile versus waterfall, this versus that, and I find it quite interesting, particularly speaking to people like yourselves on this podcast. It's refreshing to get the views of going, actually, you know what, you can have both if you do it in the right way. And and I hope those that listen to this, sort of pick up on that. And because this is the key thing of why we did this podcast, is to share perspective. And I think that's what you're getting at, is everything you've said for me is around gaining perspective. If you're sitting in the office, can you get perspective of what's happening at site? If you're at site, potentially, can you get perspective of what decisions need to be made in the office and why they're being made? When you're looking at adopting technology, do you have the perspective on why you need to adopt the technology, what problems it's trying to solve? And then potentially you'll be able to engage better, faster, quicker with that new technology. And if you have the perspective of what won't work, then maybe you don't want to adopt that technology. But I think it's that all-round perspective. But look, we don't want to keep you all night. We've been speaking to you sort of for the best part of an hour. Were there any other sort of topics you wanted to cover before we sort of hint towards the end of the podcast?
I mean, there's loads to talk about, but I think we've covered like some key things, and to spare everyone's ears, I think we've covered quite a bit, so I'm good, but there's always more to talk about in this space. And I think construction tech is a incredible space to be involved in at the moment. And there's plenty to speak about, as you well know. Yeah,
it's a fascinating space. And I think we're at the tip of the iceberg, and, hats off to folk like yourself for pushing the boundaries and, bringing fresh perspectives to the industry. I think it's really, really important. Let's test Val, though. Val, are you still there? There you go.
There we go. I mean, it's most apt to have technical issues on a technical topic. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Premier. It was a great conversation. I just think maybe a lasting question from me, Sarah, to wrap up the podcast in such a wonderful way would be to talk about the future. And we often talk to a lot of guests about their predictions for the future. What is yours, given the large, I think, what we call critical mass of things like generative AI, large language models, machine learning, entering the mainstream and monetizing their products? With that context in mind, what is the future of construction without saying Excel? What's your view on that?
I think, like I talked at length, and Martin, I don't think I really answered your question earlier. I can talk more kind of around this, but I think the future of it is open data standards. I think that's going to become more and more important to individual businesses, to government. We haven't talked about the rack issue in schools kind of at the moment, and that's been found kind of in other buildings. We've obviously had Grenfell. There's this real need and requirement kind of for change at kind of that level. And I think, everyone across, every single business involved in a project, including like client and FM provider, having invested interest, I think, in data being open. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think the key winners in the future are going to be the ones that work towards that and work out, you know, how they play well with others. And Martin, like, what does that actually mean? Like, how is that going to be done? How are we going to do it? And driving kind of that. So I think that's one. And I think in the space of generative AI, I am no expert in this space. And as I say, like, I'm really interested in the boring technology around like solving like the real kind of core basic problems and getting that kind of right. And building kind of that pipeline. But for me, I think that human-centric, like capturing that knowledge at the coalface across that supply chain and then building, let's say, that LLM and then using that to train, I know, an adaptive learning algorithm or creating a large language model, but it's built on real industry knowledge, not on like a PDF that's on a health and safety leadership tool that was done 12 months ago versus like, or a project plan that you might have lied into the client and hidden certain things in, you know, that. And I think, you know, kind of really kind of capturing that, but making it open-ended. So as well, and around like, and what I mean by that is like, you know, like it could be anything and training it off of that and around kind of what comes through, as well as like, you know, I'm really interested in playing well with others and then linking into those systems to say like, we'll bring in different assets that teams can link just really easily to that asset. And then, well, what can then happen later? But look, I think for the future, I think there's some really exciting, awesome stuff coming, and it's already here. But let's get some of the basics right, and let's create tech that's not just for the tier 1 contractors. There's 99.8% of the market like to go, like, and we need to, you know, they need, you know, that's where the magic is. That's where the bulk of the work is delivered. And I think the future for me in terms of technology is building tech that serves those smaller suppliers that truly deliver that work. And I think they've been too long ignored, and I think the future is with them.
Amazing. I hope Val's internet provider is listening to you just at the end there about providing tech that works, because he's dropping in and out, he's interrupting us, making us echo. But it's never a Project Chatter podcast without a few bloopers in it as well, Sarah. I'm going to put Martin on the spot. We haven't done Fiverr in a little while. So
piece
Martin,
of advice for people new to the
project. If you're ready,
explain
to Sarah. You probably know what Fiverr is, Sarah, but if you don't mind taking Sarah through the basis.
Okay, so if we 5 quick fire questions about yourself. So let's make a start. Question 1: what's your one? Nice. That answer resonates with Dale there. I can see him laughing. Number 2: what's the big fashion?
Own up when you don't know something, because most of the time people are really happy to share what their knowledge is, and don't pretend that you know what it is.
Biggest misconception about project management?
That you need to be organised. That's total bollocks. You can usually tell from, excuse my language, but I always think that you get fresh grad that's come straight out of university and they've read kind of a book or like a Medium article and they tell you it's about organisation. It's not. It's about communication. So I think, there's no amount of organisation that's gonna, it's gonna cut and make a successful project. People, communication. I like to think a bit of both, really. That's a cop-out answer, but I like to believe that you can get there. I think you. I don't know. That's a
It's okay,
difficult question. That we could be here for spend another hour trying to unpick that. If I'm honest with you, but like I could go in all places.
What would be your book recommendation to our listeners?
Really like Quiet by Susan Cain. I think it's really underrated. I don't know if you guys know that, but like she debunks the school of thought that those that speak the loudest are the best leaders. And I think, and she goes into her research is super thorough into this, and she looks at actually the best leaders. Probably follows on quite well to your last question. You don't need to be the ones that like shout the loudest to be the most successful. And then what does that actually kind of like really look like? And the second thing, I think I just love this, is she totally like
Great.
rips apart the concept of open plan officers, and I hate open plan officers, like with the where there's total, and she looks around the impact onto teams in that regard. It's a really interesting.
Finally,
she's
if you
really
had your
interesting,
time
and it's
again,
a
would
very
you go
good
straight
book.
into construction, consulting, something else?
It's very easy to kind of like be like, can I go back in terms of, I'm kind of comfortable with the choices I've made. I mean, sometimes I think, crap, have I made a very poor decision going from construction to tech side, because it can certainly, the highs can be very high, but the lows can be very low as well. But I'm pretty good with a lot of the choices I've made, if I'm honest. And someone reminded me, an infrastructure director reminded me a while ago. He was like, well, Sarah, regardless, it's like, even if you come back to construction in 10 years' time, it's not like it's going to have moved on too much for you to like pick up. So but I think all in all, like, I'm good. It's construction's an awesome space. Everyone should want to work here, and I think we should start championing it. Like, we beat it up a lot, and we speak. And there's a lot of negative. It gets a lot of negative press, but overall, it's a kick-ass industry to work in.
Absolutely, I totally agree, and yeah, that resonates with me. Sarah Crawley, it's been fantastic. I've loved having you on the show. I think Val has as well, the intermittent bits he's managed to listen, but I'm sure he'll listen back and find lots of humor, as will our listeners. So thank you so much for being such a great sport. Thank you for being so open with your thoughts and opinions as well. All of our guests are, but I think the listeners will gain a lot from what you're saying, and that perspective is key. And yeah, before we let you go, is there any final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I think if you're looking at any tech at any point over the next kind of now or in the future, make sure you pay attention to where does it sit? Can you get it out? Who owns it? It's your data at the end of the day, and I think it's to be savvy on where that's stored in process, and that it is your data. It's yours, and it should therefore, you should be able to do what you choose with it, and don't let tech suppliers dictate that to you. You have a lot of power there, and whoever you go with and whoever you talk to, I think those are two really, really important considerations.
Fantastic. What two great takeaways to take away for the listeners. Really, really appreciate your time. As I said, it's been an absolute privilege and pleasure to have you on our podcast, and we'll definitely have you back again for a part 2.
Cool. Well, thanks so much. And yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, hopefully without the echoes next time, and a working Val with working technology. But there you have it, folks. That is all we have time for on this episode. But remember, please help us pay it forward and share a link to this episode on your favorite social media. Once again, a massive thank you to our guest, Sarah Crawley, and thank you all for listening. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Martin, and a little bit of Val,
nice one.
It's bye for now.
That was really good.